Hello, everyone, and welcome to our structured conversation this afternoon, well, for us in the EST anyway, looking ahead, emerging higher education reforms and student affairs assessment with Amber, Garrison, Duncan from the Lumina Foundation. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I will serve as your moderator today. On behalf of the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders Professional Development Committee, thank you for participating in today's structured conversation. I also want to thank our presenter, the SAL Ph.D. Committee, Marilee Demeter, and Margot Saltonsall for all of their help in putting today's presentation together. A few logistics before we get started. Please feel free to adjust the size of your chat box on the left to more closely monitor our conversation. I encourage you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through chatting and using the various tools offered in the menu located above the chat room window. You can insert emoticons into chat using the Show Emoticon button that looks like a smiley face, and you can indicate you have stepped away from the session using the Step Away from the Session button, which looks like a silhouette with a clock. Well, we are primarily using the chat room for questions and comments. If you have a microphone and wish to ask a question or offer a comment, please press the Raise Your Hand icon, which looks like a hand, and we will turn on your microphone. There will be time for question and answers at the end of today's conversation. To get us ready for today's structured conversation, I wanted to remind everyone of our session abstract for today. Summer is often when student affairs assessment professionals look back at the previous academic year by reviewing division assessment reports and creating year-end reports. Part of closing the loop is taking time to look back as well as look forward for opportunities to include lessons learned in planning for the future. This structured conversation will provide you with a summary of 6 pressing higher education reforms and the role of student affairs assessment leaders in shaping responses to the challenges and opportunities ahead. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter today. Amber Garrison Duncan serves in a dual role at Lumina Foundation as Evaluation Officer and Strategy Officer. Her work focuses on managing evaluations and applying findings to inform Lumina's work to reach Goal 2025. She also serves on Lumina's Strategy Work Group on new systems of quality credentials in higher education, including the degree qualifications profile and tuning. These activities allow her to draw on her 15 years of experience as a campus-based student affairs professional, designing co-curricular learning experiences and leading assessment. And now it is with great excitement that I turn things over to Amber to get us started. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you so much. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in our country today, in North America, I should say. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all, and to Lisa for the introduction, to the Professional Development Committee for having me. I just have to share personally that I was lucky enough to be involved with SAL from its early stages and served as the first chair of the administration committee. So as a former leader of assessment efforts and working in Division of Student Affairs, I know personally the hard work that you do every single day. And I am thrilled to be back with you all. I like to say it's like coming home. So thank you again for having me here to talk with you today. So I wanted to start with the learning outcomes, because that is certainly where we all like to start as given what we do every day and where most people should start, right? And what I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to discuss with you is that as I moved into Lumina and this broader conversation about higher education and where higher education reforms are headed, I find myself so many times saying, where is student affairs? Where are the folks who are supporting student success in complement to the curricular work that's happening? And I find myself saying, how do I reach out? How is it that we can kick this dialogue up within student affairs? And so again, I'm really excited to be able to just share with you what my observations are, and then present some brief ideas about what it is that where these reforms might mean for what student affairs is, how it is that you, by being informed of these reforms and where higher education is heading, how you can best position yourselves as leaders within your division, and help your campuses manage change. I will say, you know, there's 6 reforms listed here. They are not all encompassing. They are just some that are really pressing down right now. And again, want you to be able to kind of be ahead of the curve and understand how to position yourself. And I also want to just kind of put a plug in for that everything that we're going to talk about here today is also going to be, it's in a chapter that's coming out in a book this fall that Kevin Kruger and I co-wrote a chapter about looking ahead and what are some of these changes and how are they going to impact student affairs, or predict a little bit of what we think they might do around student affairs and how key assessment will be. And then certainly just want to say that the book was a labor of love with my dear colleagues in co-editing it with Dan Bureau and Rosie Bingham at the University of Memphis. But each chapter is written by many people who are on this call today and leaders in SAL. And so it's student affairs professionals who wrote a chapter with their vice president of student affairs about how do we lead assessment for student success? How do we, again, best position our institutions and our divisions to contribute to student success? So I just want to put a little plug in that if you're interested in following up, that book will be an opportunity to also follow up, and that will be out in the fall. So again, we're going to talk about reform, be able to give you a moment to analyze some of those challenges and hopefully come up with some strategies as you leave today. And hopefully that next slide will advance. There we go. And so I also like to spend just a minute talking about Lumina Foundation. Some of you may or may not be familiar about Lumina Foundation, and so I just wanted to give you a minute around where my perspective is coming from about what we do and why we feel this conversation is so important for the country. And at Lumina, we have one goal. We're the largest foundation that focuses on higher education. It's our complete mission, and that our goal is that by the time we reach 2025, that we would have at least 60% of Americans with high-quality degrees, certificates, and other credentials. And you may notice, some of you who may have followed this, is that we used to say high-quality degrees. But what we're finding is that certificates and other credentials are also high quality, also have high economic return for individuals. And so we're broadening our scope around what that means. And we do a lot of that based on, and you may be familiar with the Georgetown Center for Workforce and Education, is that we want people to be able to advance themselves because of their learning. So does a credential, meaning certificate, degree, other pieces, actually lead them to better work and employment and on to further education? So just wanted to clarify what we mean by high quality and how that goal is framed up. And a little bit about why this is so important, again, not just to us, but why we believe it's important to the country, is that between 2008 and 2018, so 3 years from now, the U.S. economy is anticipated to create about 46.8 million job openings. That's from new jobs being created to retiring persons in our citizenry. And so 29.8 million of those jobs will require some type of post-secondary credential. So 16 million will require a bachelor's degree, and only 17.9 million will be for high school graduates. So when we look at the number of degrees that we have to have by the time we get to 2018, is that 63% of job openings are going to require some type of post-secondary training beyond high school. Again, that's 3 years away. And so we're even talking about before we get to 2025, where we've set the 60% mark, we're at least trying to get us to the 60% mark by 2025, knowing how slow and how hard change is. But again, it's imperative, and we see that it's imperative to our country, our economic well-being, and to individual success, right? Is that if we want individuals to be successful in this information economy, we've got to make sure that people have access to post-secondary credentials and are able to complete them in a timely fashion. So that's our goal and why we feel this is so important to follow. So where are we at on that path? And this slide shows you a little bit about where our current performance is. And Lumina takes it upon itself to track annually where the U.S. is in regards to degree attainment. And again, this is not focused on access. This is focused on how many people actually complete their degree. And so our report that we issue is called Stronger Nation. You can find that on our website. It's also just at strongernation.luminafoundation.org. You can break that data down. So this right here slide shows you where we're at on the path for the U.S. You can break that down by state. You can break that down by county. So say, for instance, if you wanted to take this data and understand what it means for the county through which your institution is situated, that might be a really compelling data point for you to take forward to say, look, we know our attainment rate is 64%, and our county's attainment rate is even lower. We've got to do something on behalf of these individuals to make sure that people are able to finish their credentials. So what we know, again, as you can see, the path, that orange line, is quite a bit higher than the blue line, so we have some work to do. And based on all of our research, what we know is that, one, we need to continue to serve our current students better. So that means we need to get out of the around 50% range that the U.S. has for degree completion. So only about 50-ish% of the people who actually start a credential are able to finish it. So right now, what that means for our country is that we have 38 million Americans with some college, no degree. Sometimes those Americans have 98 credits. So clearly they may have potentially earned an associate's degree, which again gives them earning power, but they were never awarded that credential. So we have to serve our current students better. We also know that in order to reach the goal, that we have to focus on equity and outcomes, that there are major equity gaps for African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos, and for all adults of all races and ethnicities, that if we're going to get to the goal, we really have to focus on new strategies that will help those students complete their credentials. So what you'll hear a lot of Lumina talking about is what we call our equity imperative, around focusing on, if we don't name those gaps, we don't call them out, we're never going to focus on new strategies to help students get to the goal. So you'll hear us talk about that a lot, and I'll talk about that again when we get into some of the strategies. So again, we have about 20% gap to make up here to reach that goal. So we need to serve current students better, and we also need to increase outcomes for African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, and adults of all races and ethnicities. So what's happening in the field to advance that? I think it's fair to say that Lumina's goal is not unique. There are many people focused on this issue. It's been in the president's call. It's been in workforce calls for change. So what is culminating at a broader scale are these kind of big 6 things here that are going to directly impact the work that we do in student affairs. So a major call to focus in on students is that institutions need to be student-centered, learning-based, that everything we do should focus on what the student needs, and that what students need is high-quality learning that increases their role to completion. And then after we got through that, there were all these calls for, well, what does high quality mean? What do degree outcomes mean? What should a student be able to know and do as a result of an associate's degree, a certificate? Also, there are industry frameworks emerging where people are saying, here's what you need to be able to be successful in manufacturing or in marketing. Nursing and other fields have been doing this for a while. So again, there's a lot of frameworks that define what quality is. And so that's something that is really complicating the system. But at the same time, it's really good because people are focusing on, again, what is it that a student should specifically be able to know and do? Which, as then, if you look at number 3, is why we're also seeing this emergence of a focus on competency-based education. So it's a different type of delivery model that simply focuses on what are the competencies that students know? How do we best deliver those, and how do we best assess those? Which then also leads to, again, the next change is, well, then transcripts don't work for us very well, because right now they're based on a grade or some other type of course listing, and so students are saying, these don't really serve us very well. I can't communicate out what I know and I'm able to do. An employer looks at it and says, well, this means nothing to me. And so people, again, because they're really focused on what is the learning, are starting to question some of these big processes and things that have been in place for many, many years. And they're all on the table for, okay, let's start over, or let's really alter this in a major way, which again is going to impact the work that we do in student affairs. And then the next 2 are probably things that you are very familiar with. Big data analytics is a hot topic. There are many technology firms and vendors that are in the marketplace around this, really pushing on institutions. Again, if we're going to be student-centered, what happens to our students? Where do they go once they come in? Can we do some predictive analysis to be able to find the barriers ahead of time and remove those, or maybe know that we need to follow up with certain students at certain times of the year and make sure that they stay on track, and how do we use technology to do that? And there's a lot of questions emerging around that, certainly things that you're probably encountering every single day, ethical questions that emerge. So, but again, there's a lot of pressure being put on institutions to use the data that we have, because we are data rich and sometimes analysis poor. So how do we use everything that we already collect to understand how to better serve students? Because, as number 6 says, there's all these new accountability measures coming into place. And you want your institution to be able to respond to those in a way, again, they're intended to benefit students. And so how do you use all those reforms ahead of that I just described to meet those new accountability measures that are emerging? So now we're going to dive into each of these specifically. So again, what does it mean to be student-centered learning based? And to be honest, one of the things that excites me about this focus is that it really speaks to student affairs. It is what we do. We are the only function at the institution that has student in our name. We are about students, and so I think there's really a great opportunity for us to help institutions understand how is it that we focus in on our institutional accountability rather than student deficits. So much of the focus has been focused on, well, those students aren't prepared, or they came in and, you know, it's their fault. It's all of their fault. And so rather than saying, okay, students are going to come in with maybe some things that they need to learn, that's the role of higher education, but what is our job? This is our responsibility to make sure every student succeeds. And so how do we become accountable to that? That's a shift in conversation. A lot of the time in higher ed, we think, well, students need to find their way and they need to grow. And certainly as we think about the student groups that were previously mentioned, again, where our equity imperative is that puts the fault on them for other social things, social capital that they may not have, or just college knowledge about how the system works that they may not have. So again, how do we take accountability for that and put ourselves in a place of owning it? I talked to you about, again, setting an attainment goal that is focused on increasing closes achievement gap and increases attainment overall. So again, if we know that our attainment rate, our graduate rate is lower, we need to focus in that we've got to increase attainment totally. And we can't just increase attainment by the people that we know have traditionally graduated from our institution, but we need to understand where is it that where students are not having success. So it is that one of the equity groups that we've talked about, most likely than not. It will be one of the groups. So it will probably be, you need to focus in and name that. Again, a lot of institutions talk about wanting all students to achieve and wanting to focus in on African American, Latino, Native Americans, but they don't have an explicit goal that says they're going to do that, nor do they have any strategies that are going to do that. So that's a really important thing we've seen institutions do that have helped them be successful. Also, partnerships. And you hear this all the time, and student affairs professionals are some of the best at doing this, but we've got to really lead on this, is how do we partner with motivated faculty, staff, employers, K-12, and I would encourage you to think outside about the nonprofit organizations that exist around your institution that seek to serve students. How do we fully bring folks to the table to wrap around what students will need? And then the next piece that we've seen students do is that, can we assure that we're offering high quality learning that aligns with workforce needs? And so this is where, again, partnership is really key. We have to be in conversations with those outside. So what is it that students are going to need to be successful in this world? And I think we ask that quite often. I'm not saying that employment should drive that, but what we talk about at Lumina is that we're here for the student. So how do we make sure we're setting up the student for what is needed? Is that we've got to understand workforce needs, we've got to understand that, and we've got to help faculty understand that. So some of the pieces that we've seen are employer and faculty or student affairs generated learning experiences. again, very real world, very much focused on what students agree, on what faculty agree the student's going to need, but also what the employer agrees. So they've really been able to come to a shared understanding of how to provide that learning for students. And it's on ourselves as student affairs professionals to connect ourselves to that high quality learning and be able to call out what it is that we do that contributes to that learning. The next piece is you're going to hear a lot about pathways in the coming years. And pathways is, I would say, to be honest, a term that people equate with a lot of different ways, but I think what is most, the easiest way to think about this is there a clear pathway for my learning? Is there a clear pathway for me from the start at the institution to getting my credential? So is that clear to me? So is it transparent that I need these particular learning outcomes to earn my credential? Is it flexible, meaning does it help me personalize my learning so that I can learn even more? And again, is it transparent to others? So I think that's something you're going to continue to hear a lot about. And then again, getting into new ways to teach, where credits and credentials are defined by learning competencies rather than time. Again, I talked about that on the front end, that we're really getting into a place where it's so much focused on the learning, which is great, and we're getting rid of some of the proxies that used to represent learning. Technology clearly is talk about big data analytics, that people have infused technology as a tool, not letting technology lead, but infuse technology as a tool to expand their capacity to serve more students, improve the quality of those connections to students, and also reduce costs. And then the other piece that I would say is really hard is how do we plan for and scale evidence-based programs and practices that focus on the whole student. Again, a great opportunity for student affairs to lead. We focus on the whole student, but how is it that we plan for and scale what we know works for every student? Because what is happening on campuses is that 50 students or 100 students or 300 students might receive some type of service that helps them. However, we're on a campus with 20,000 students. What happens to all those other students? And so what are the things that we're doing to make sure that every student receives those evidence-based practices, a connection to those, or participates in those programs, so that we know that they're able to be successful? And then certainly to be in counter to all of that is the whole affordability question, because we do know that high-touch learning opportunities matter. However, what we know is that affordability is out of reach for many, many citizens. A recent figure is that the amount of unmet need for Pell Grant students would be 60% of their family's income. So how does a low-income student with a Pell Grant their family has to make up use 60% of their family income to make up the difference? That's unrealistic. So we have to think about costs. We have to think how to do this better and be able to better incorporate pieces. So again, what are the opportunities for student affairs? I think the one thing that we can do, and for assessment especially, is how, again, we are the only ones with students in our name. How are we the experts on students? And how are we the experts about how students learn, how they experience the institution, and how do we be a voice and an advocate for students? And then how do we help the institution sharpen a focus on the experiences that best meet those needs? I would also put on this, as you know, we also need to help the institution create a stop doing list. So if we sharpen focus and we do what we know works, that also allows us to push things off the plate that maybe don't work as well or have not had the impact we thought, so that we can reallocate those resources to things that do. And then the other piece, again, is to put students ahead of preconceived notions of who does what across traditional silos. I really think that these, we're already seeing this. Some of what is happening is that people are being pushed out of their silos, jobs are being merged together, people are being asked to be more generalist. So you may be, for instance, I know at UNLV, the RAs are also financially resources for students. So again, where there's just pushing and breaking of traditional roles and silos, and everybody's being asked to be held accountable for student success. So be open to that. And I think you, again, because of the assessment knowledge, you want to help people make decisions about all these things based on what we know about students. And I just see a note about who our students are going to be. Absolutely, that's a great question, is that you want to be able to move in that direction. So the next piece we want to talk about is, again, those common learning frameworks that are emerging. You may have heard of some of these. I would say if you've not heard of some of these, you definitely want to become familiar with them. Is that we've got, we have many frameworks emerging. We have the early one, you know, you're all familiar with AAC&U LEAP, Essential Learning Outcomes. A big blank on here, and I apologize, are certainly the CAS SALDOs, the Student Learning and Development Outcomes. There's also the degree qualifications profile, which is about 5 years old. And then you also have these industry certification frameworks, or HR managers developing frameworks for what it is that employees need to be successful in a given field. So you can imagine what this might mean for students, is that what is it that I need? What is my transparent learning outcome? How do I know that? How do I know if I want to be, this is my career? Where do I go? What credential do I need? It's very, very messy right now. But again, what we think is the good thing is that people are getting clear about what it is people need to be able to do at various stages of their career, various stages of credentials, so that we can better help guide students towards the credentials that they need. So one of the things that I hadn't talked about just yet is, you'll see that beta credential framework up there, is that Lumina just launched what we are calling the Connecting Credentials Dialogue. And so we've launched a national dialogue with about 60 co-sponsors of people who come from industry organizations, higher education organizations, all of the different folks who have a vested interest in clarifying what all this means. Everyone's coming to the table to say, hold on, we have a problem. This is a really complex system that's almost impossible for us to talk through, but yet alone, again, how would a student navigate this? And so what Lumina has done is, again, called for the dialogue, but then we've put this beta credential framework on the table to say, would this be a tool that the U.S. would like to make use of? Many other countries, most every other country, have some type of leveling where they show how credentials are stacked, the type of learning that's involved, and they're typically 8 to 10 levels defined. And so we've worked with a team of people to create one of those. And again, the part of this framework is, or this dialogue, is to say what's helpful. Is the credential framework some kind of translation booth where industry and higher ed folks and workforce folks, anyone can get together, come in and say, here's what I have for my learning. What does this mean? What level does this mean I'm at? And does that translate to some of these other, does that help me understand where I fit? In Europe, for instance, now instead of saying credentials, you'll hear students say, oh, I'm a level 4 or I'm a level 5. And employers are now posting job advertisements saying, you know, instead of a particular credential, they're looking for people who represent learning in a level 7. So again, it's more about what are the competencies at that level versus what are the, 5 credentials I earned to get there, or maybe the 2 credentials I earned to get there. So again, just a brief explanation about how this conversation is evolving. It's very new, and I can see Marilee just posted, if you go to connectingcredentials.org, you can also contribute to that dialogue, so it's not a closed-off dialogue. It's meant to be something that everyone's talking about, is what is the learning that is needed in our country. When we say high quality, let's specifically define that and help students navigate that. So again, what does that mean for student affairs? And you've seen some divisions, really start to hone in on this, is what is it that we, in our Division of Student Affairs, says that we contribute to learning because of the co-curricular experiences we create? And how do we define that? How do we name that? And then how do we intentionally incorporate, design, and assess that learning? Because that, what you'll see in every single one of those frameworks is an opportunity for student affairs to shine. So for instance, in the degree qualifications profile, there's an applied learning section. There's a civic and global learning section. There are pieces that talk about communication and teamwork. And so there's ways for us to align what we do and again, start to more intentionally design those. So it's great that we do that, but we can't just do that for 10 students. How is it that we plan to contribute to more learning for more volume of students? And how do we assess that learning and make sure we assess that and validate that so the student actually has credit for it or can talk about what it is that they've learned as a result. Because all of that's going to start to emerge and push on us to be able to participate in that conversation. So again, we've talked about a little bit about competency-based education. You'll hear, I should also say, we've heard learning outcomes talked about, we've heard competencies, proficiencies. There is not one word that everyone agrees in the field is what we should call things. So we've just decided that a lot of times learning outcomes is the easiest thing. Everyone seems to understand that, whether that's industry folks or higher ed folks. However, the label that's been given to this body of movement here is competency-based education. And so it's a new model where it's very flexible for students because, again, their learning is transparent. I understand exactly what it is I'm supposed to learn. I earn credit based on what I can demonstrate I know and am able to do. So it's not that I get a letter grade, it's not based on my seat time or credit hour, it's literally based on what I can demonstrate. And so that requires students to be directly assessed. And again, this is kind of a neat opportunity. So again, faculty are saying, did you meet a competency, or maybe you know, there's more check marks or different types of marks, and that's an interesting conversation to be a part of as well, is what does this look like when we don't have letter grades? Do you say meet or not meet, or do you say, you know, halfway to the proficiency? And so folks have been able to kind of set that apart and be able to say where it is that students are in gaining those competencies. But one of the biggest benefits, especially as we think about adults, is that students are able to move at their own pace, and they get to blur the lines. Instead of seeing education as something they go and do on their own, separate from anything in their work or their life, students actually blur that and are able to integrate their learning from multiple environments. And that all of that learning counts. And I think that's a real benefit that we've seen adults be able to take advantage of competency-based education programs because it doesn't require them to go back and learn things that they already know. It also doesn't require them to, again, be this separate entity. It allows them to be one learning human being, which I think really, again, hones in on some of the things we believe in student affairs about holistic learning, that it is every experience that provides me with learning to become who I need to be and to meet those competencies. And so, again, what does this mean for student affairs? I kind of got into some of this already, but it really is, it really allows us to open the door for co-curricular learning. Again, if I can bring all my learning in from multiple environments, it allows student affairs a place at the table. Whereas before, we've really kind of been regulated in that, again, co-curricular, extracurricular world. It is more of how do we help students really bring all this learning together. And for institutions that are able to do this well is, again, they partner. It's academic affairs, student affairs, or sometimes what are called coaches that help students, again, understand what it is they're supposed to learn, and then identify places where they can learn that, whether that's a classroom experience, a work experience, or something they're volunteering in their community to do. The other thing that it allows us to do is, again, we don't need to rely on a credit, or we don't need to rely on a course number or a grade to be able to give students validation for what they've learned. So in assessment, we all know we are directly assessing students for what they've learned. And so we just need to be able to do more of that to be able to enter this conversation. And then the next piece, again, is what do we do with all that learning? So now we have all of these competencies assessed from students, and we know that students say a course number and a grade doesn't help me. Employers say, I don't know what to do with this transcript. It doesn't tell me what students know are able to do. And so people are really pushing on, okay, what's the purpose of a transcript? What should it look like? And the other piece is they're often not digital. So people have a piece of paper. Again, where do I take a piece of paper and what does this say about me? And so we know that transcripts are already transitioning to be more digital, so that it's not a piece of paper or a PDF, that it's actual data points from a database really that can be used and pulled out. And we know there's lots of institutions that are they are, again, the competency-based type education institutions, but there's also some more traditional institutions that are experimenting with ways to document all of the learning that happens while students on their way to a degree or credential. And so again, what does that mean for student affairs? You can probably imagine, and many of you probably have thought about some of these things, is again, we need to ensure that the systems and protocols are in place to capture that learning. Because as these new transcripts emerge, we're going to have an opportunity to contribute to that. And we want, in the best service of students, we need to be able to do that for them. And we need to be able to facilitate the use of these transcripts to students. And a lot of times, sometimes it will require another conversation sometimes to say, you have all these competencies now, can you talk about what you know and are able to do? But then also sometimes there's some translation with employers, but this is much clearer for employers. But sometimes we're using different language or labels when we talk about things. So oftentimes, because when we're assessing things, we get more granular than with our labels than an employer might. So an employer might put 10 competencies under leadership and say, I need people who can do leadership. And we would say, well, we have all 10 of these competencies. And they're like, well, where's leadership? So again, there's a translation point that sometimes has to happen. And I think that's another place where student affairs, particularly our career centers, and other folks could jump in and help with some of that translation and really help both the student and employers make use of these what are being called extended transcripts. And I will say, just a teaser, there should be a big announcement next week about a project specifically around this to really accelerate these transcripts and how they're being used, because we're hearing a lot of positive feedback about what they do for students and employers. Big data analytics, again, really looking into how is it that institutions are able to analyze their patterns of student performance, persistence, completion, and again, set that attainment goal. And I know this sounds, it sounds like things we know, but as many of you know, when you get into the nitty-gritty, that sometimes those data live in different places. And sometimes the data you need are you know, people don't want to share data, or you have a hard time getting it all into one system so that you can analyze it. And so it really takes a lot of leadership, and sometimes that rests within student affairs to really be the, sometimes they're a retention committee, or really working with the enrollment management folks to understand, okay, well, if this is where we know we have major predictors of success, or we have major predictors where students are leaving, what is it that's happening? And often student affairs, again, can help interpret that and say, here's where we can make a difference or a benefit, because we're often seeing what was the barrier that caused that student to leave, or what was the program or practice that helped that be a predictor of success. So really using technology to understand and create those predictive places. So again, be an advocate to help institutions use data analytics, help them understand where they're at. There was also two examples I'll talk about here, is that there was a particular program that really looked at what happened to students after they left. So whether that was after orientation or after a particular leadership experience, after they left a residence hall, is what happens to the student the next year, directly after they leave that experience. What were they successful in doing? Did they go on to do other things? Or should we have better directed them to the next opportunity to help create this seamless learning experience, or again, the pathway conversation? And certainly the early alert systems. Some of you probably have heard, I'm sure all of you have heard of these pieces. Again, is early alert. I just heard of a campus that uses actual Salesforce to do what they were calling hyper Salesforce, where students are contacted via text message or via email or whatever kind of mode they signed up for, to be contacted when there are things that they need to be alerted for. And I think a lot of times we've thought, oh, well, those are learning opportunities for students. They need to manage this. But also thinking in our day-to-day lives, how many times we need the credit card, email, bill reminder to make sure you pay that, or the phone bill reminders, that we get prompts in our life to take care of certain things. And I think that's where folks are using, again, those early alert systems to provide prompts, in particular for systems like our institutions that are very complex and require a lot of knowledge about how to navigate. So being able to be a part of that. And then on the new accountability measures, I would just be aware of some of the things. We've all heard of U.S. News and World Report, but there are some new pieces that are emerging. There's the Washington Monthly ratings, certainly the federal rating system that's on the table. There's a Gallup-Purdue index that looks at how students are thriving once they leave. There's also new accountability measures being put in place by regional and specialized accreditors. And then states are even looking to put in new accountability measures. So over 30 state legislatures have passed policies that tie the state appropriations to student outcomes. It used to be seat time and it used to be enrollment, and now it's really focused on how many of your students are graduating, how many of your African American students are graduating, your Latino students, your Native American students, your adults, and your funding is tied to your success in graduating people. So that's also something that, as you think about the President's Cabinet and your leadership, is how do you help them be able to respond to the questions that they're going to get and help them navigate, okay, if there's increased responsibility for high quality learning and completion, and we're not doing very well, which, as we know, we're not on track to meet the goal, so most institutions aren't doing as well as they could be. How do I help my institution move forward and push on this? And so again, being prepared to help your institution, or in particular your senior leader, be aware of and understand what evidence do we have? What evidence do we need to collect? What changes might that require for us to be able to have that evidence? And then certainly being able to be, again, a collection point for that, is that we're uniquely positioned to be able to understand student completion and learning and contribute on a broader scale to success. So the big piece I want to leave you with is, as you can see, every one of those changes requires some type of assessment activity to happen, whether that's having clear learning outcomes, directly assessing that learning, or being able to analyze student retention and persistence, graduation data. That's all going to be expected. That's where every single reform is headed, is that it requires assessment to be of the mindset. And Dan Bureau often says we're going to be assessment professionals who have a specialized knowledge about student affairs, because that's really where so much of this is headed. We have to be experts in both. So I just want to reiterate, you have a great leadership opportunity. Again, these are all challenges, but I think it uniquely positions, one, student affairs to take a leadership role, and for you all as student affairs assessment leaders to take that charge and help people understand, here's what's coming, here's how we use evidence to guide decision making, or here's how we use evidence to demonstrate where we're making a great impact. So I just wanted to leave you with that, and then certainly open it up for questions, because there was a lot to cover just then. So thanks for letting me get through all of that.
Thank you, Amber. This was great, and I saw that there was a lot of really great discussion already happening over in the chat window, which is awesome. So as Amber mentioned, we will now open the floor if there are any questions or comments to continue our conversation. We do have about 10 minutes or so left in our time together today. So if you'd like to ask questions, you can do that in a couple of ways. You can type your question into our chat window, and I can read that out and have that shared with Amber. If you'd like to ask a question using your microphone, you can raise your hand. Again, that's the little hand icon near the bottom there. And then we will turn on your microphone and give you the opportunity to ask a question that way. So we will open it up to questions and comments. Amber, while we're waiting, did you want to talk a little bit about the hashtags that you have at the bottom of your slide there?
Yes, and I just saw Joe ask a question.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great. So Joe Levy just asked, how can we leverage entities like Luma to reiterate the importance and relevance of student affairs efforts in all these priorities? And that's a great question. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think there's a real, I'm often saying, where is student affairs? Where is academic advising? Where are the folks who are connected, and even the financial aid officers? Is that there are a lot of people involved in the type of work that has to be done. And so I think people are opening up to that a lot more. And particularly at Lumina, I will share that there's at least 4 of us who have student affairs backgrounds. And so we're trying to bring that perspective to the table, trying to create more partnerships where we may work with AACNU, or we may work with APLU or some of the other organizations to say, don't forget about NASFA ACPA, don't forget about NACADA, don't forget about, again, the financial aid officers. There are folks who have to be involved in these reform efforts. And so we're trying to move more in that direction. And I would say, certainly, Joe, you mentioned our publications, is that we have some publications, but I think as we look at where we're granting out money, is that when we grant out money, it's often very project-based. So again, it's not so much focused on research, it's focused on how do we, now that we know a lot about what needs to be done, how do we document how institutions are creating these changes? And how do we help those organizations push that out to the field? Because sometimes Lumina's voice is very welcome, and also sometimes Lumina's voice is not very welcome. And so we try to leverage through both by saying, again, can particular organizations provide thought leadership around this if Lumina needs to stay in the background? And so I think you're hearing, hopefully what you should be hearing from the field at this point is, I do feel like everyone's pushing in very similar directions. They have a little bit of different things that we believe about how this happens, but everyone's really pushing on these particular items to be able to be reformed. So hopefully, I don't know if that answered your question, Joe, but I will say there's a lot of movement in the field. And then, Lisa, you asked about the hashtags?
Yes.
So Stronger Nation, as I mentioned, is our annual report. So there's a couple of foundations that do annual reports about things that are specific. So for instance, the NEKC Foundation provides a report for the nation that says kids count. So what is the life of children and youth in our country? And so Lumina does something similar around higher education, is what is, when we look at the data across the country, we compile all that by working with a variety of organizations because IPEDS is not all-inclusive. It's only first-time, first-generation students. So it doesn't really capture what's happening across the country. So we try to provide that, that data resource. And then certainly, again, Goal 2025, we just use to push out information about what relevant to the goal, right? We need to reach 60%. So what are things people are doing, or are there, is there a hot topic, or here's an article, or someone found something new about how to reach the goal, push that out through that. I also would, if you want to follow these reforms, what Lumina tries to do through our daily news clips is provide you with articles, research reports, anything that's being written about these reforms in the field, that you get those delivered to email inbox daily. So that's a great way, again, to follow, because I feel like because student affairs is very strong in being clear about our purpose and our goal and our mission, I think sometimes we get disconnected from that broader conversation. And so again, the more that you can be aware of what's happening in the bigger picture items where reforms are happening on a national level, we can figure out how do we stay true to who we are, but position us within those reforms as they're happening. And our good colleague, Jennifer Jocelyn here, is in the chat room. Jennifer is with NACADA, another amazing, amazing person who directly understands this. She was the director of academic advising when I was at the University of Oregon, when I was the director of student affairs assessment and research, and we had to collaborate on a lot of these topics, but she's now at NACADA, and they are doing a great job too at pushing what does it mean, what does the completion agenda mean for student affairs, for folks who are interacting with students outside the classroom. So again, there's a lot of organizations who are picking this up, NASP is picking this up, ACPA is picking this up. So again, folks are really trying to be responsive to where the country is trying to go.
This is great, Amber. Thank you. And I will say, as someone who's involved in several of those acronyms or collections of random letters, that I'm so thrilled to see that there is that greater connection and partnership between the associations and the institutions. I think that's a long time coming, and that's great to hear.
And again, there's a lot happening. So if I had to leave you with something too, is to use your assessment to be able to understand where we start, make a plan. There's going to be a lot of changes required, and so again, use your evidence to help you decide where it is you place your efforts first. And again, you're the drivers of change. I have no doubt that assessment and folks who are in this role have a major leadership role to play as all of these things are unfolding.
Hi, Amber. This is Mary Lee. I have a question. I was wondering how prior learning assessment might fit in. As someone who will be working at a community college later this year that is focused on encouraging adult learners to return, I hypothesize that maybe folks might be hesitant to return to education, and maybe prior learning assessment might be able to kind of motivate folks to get on board. So I was just wondering how that might all play into this.
Yes, major player in this. So prior learning assessment really ties in well with some of the competency-based approaches, is where students, again, are able to come in and demonstrate what it is that they already know and are able to do before they start their curriculum work. So what typically happens, many of the models today, again, it uses direct assessment, so students might build a portfolio or might need to write something or might need to prepare a presentation, again, some way to demonstrate what they already know and are able to do for the institution, so that then someone can validate that learning for them, and they can come in and skip, again, taking courses that would lead to the same outcomes, but again, they already know that information, so we're not going to make them take that course again. And so, yes, prior learning assessment will be a key part of that. There's also something we've been saying too, is that instead of just calling it prior learning, there's also practice learning assessment. So again, how do we just open the door to say, how do we meet students where they're at and help them progress onto where they need to go? And if we have clear learning outcomes, we understand what outcomes are associated with each credential, then we can start with where they're at and move them forward, often at a much faster pace. So I meant to mention earlier, there's a project that's testing this model. It's called an Accelerated Degree Program Model in Indiana, Ohio, and the SUNY system has it going. And they're seeing great success where, again, adults come in, they can demonstrate their learning, they are able to move through to their credential, and then the stories that come out about, you know, I earned my credential, even an associate's degree. People are getting raises, people are getting promotions, people are able to apply for that next job. So it sounds, it really does make a difference for people as they're trying to move through the system. So yes, prior learning assessment is something you'll hear a lot about. There's a lot of research that shows students who have at least 12 credits prior learning are more likely to finish their credential. So again, it's a way to say you've already earned a lot of this, and it's a motivator for people to move through. And there's some research from Texas for institutions that use prior learning that it also highly benefited Latino students because they were able to come in and demonstrate their learning. I will say sometimes we have heard institutions say that they have a hard time convincing students to use that option. And part of that is that financial aid doesn't cover it. So there's major policy barriers to prior learning because prior learning overcovers what's happening as a result of a credit hour and continuous faculty involvement. So some institutions might have, like, for $90, get all your prior learning assessed before you start your courses. But even then, sometimes students are a little leery of it.
Thanks, Mary Lee, and thanks, Amber. I'm just noticing the time, and time flies when you're having fun and learning a lot. But unfortunately, we'll have to end our conversation, at least for this hour today. As you saw, Amber has listed her Twitter account as well as the Lumina Foundation Twitter account and some great hashtags for you to follow to continue the conversation. So on behalf of the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders Group, I wanted to send a special thank you again to Amber for her fascinating and really informative conversation with us today. As you can tell, this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation, and we hope to share in that conversation with all of you. Just to note as well that the Professional Development Committee for SAL is currently working to bring you three new structure conversations for the fall of 2015. We're looking at exploring topics including creating a culture of assessment, establishing relationships when it comes to creating that culture of assessment, as well as exploring social media and assessment. Information about these structure conversations will be announced through our listserv as more details become available. And I also wanted to very quickly wish Amber a happy early birthday. I know, Amber, your birthday is tomorrow if my information, i.e. Facebook, is correct. So I wanted to wish you a very happy early birthday and thank you again for sharing your information, expertise, and experience with us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much. Again, just thanks ahead for all that you do, and if I can ever be of service to anyone, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to talk with my great colleagues, so thank you.
Thank you, Amber, and thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon.